Hello, friends. Today's chapter of the day is 2 Kings chapter 16. And 2 Kings chapter 16 is kind of like watching the very beginning of a terrible car accident because you can just see the wheels falling off and all sorts of bad stuff about to happen and starting to happen in the kingdom of Judah. And remember, the kingdoms have been split. There's the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. Two of the tribes stayed with the kingdom of Judah. The remainder of the tribes went with the kingdom of Israel. And this chapter, 2 Kings 16, is about the king of the kingdom of Judah, whose name is Ahaz. He becomes king when he's 20. He's king for 16 years or something like that. And he was way off track. And by way off track, we're talking about a guy who burned his son as an offering. The chapter talks about him following the ways of the people that God told the Israelites to drive out when they came into the promised land. So you remember they didn't do that. They're still hanging around. Solomon married some of those people. That wickedness of him marrying those people causes the kingdom to divide, and still these wicked people and their wicked religions and cults and everything else that's going on are causing major problems, this time for the kingdom of Judah. So this is about Ahaz. We learn about his wicked ways and him following the culture of the Canaanites who lived there beforehand, sacrificing his son. And then after we learn about that, we learn that Judah is attacked by Israel and Syria. And wicked King Ahaz decides he's going to reach out to the king of Assyria instead of reaching out to, God to help him. And the king of Assyria comes to his rescue. Israel and Syria are not able to conquer the kingdom of Judah yet. And Assyria comes to the rescue and fights them off and drives out the Syrians and Israelites from Damascus. So King Ahaz goes to visit the king of Assyria in Damascus and finds an altar that he really likes, an altar to their pagan gods that he really likes, and he says, I want me one of those altars. So he sends word back to the high priest and says, give me one of those altars. I want one of those kind of instead of the altar we have. So the high priest builds it, and he doesn't just build this wicked altar, but he actually builds it and moves the altar of the temple of God to accommodate this new fancy altar. And he moves the altar of the temple of God out of its prominent position, kind of around the corner, and takes pieces off of the altar of the temple of God to accommodate what's going to be happening at this new altar. And King Ahaz makes a new plan about here's how we're going to do offerings from now on. Here are the offerings that are going to take place at the great altar, which is not the altar that God instructed David and Solomon to build. So Ahaz is really going off, and you can just see the foundations of faith and belief crumbling in this leadership, and you just know what's coming. But that's what's happening in 2 Kings 16. Like I said, it's an accident that's starting to happen. And really the messages for us are a couple of things. First of all, we got to be careful about who we get connected with. We kind of harp on not being unequally yoked. Don't date an unbeliever. Don't date someone who says, I go to church once in a while. That's good enough, because you're going to end up like Ahaz, because they're not a real believer. They're going to pull you away from authentic faith and obedience to Christ. Second, be careful about who you go to in times of trouble. This isn't just about romantic type relationships. Those did in Solomon. But what really did in Ahaz is he had a time of trouble and he went to Assyria. He went to a wicked pagan country instead of going to God. If we're going to someone in times of trouble and it's taking away from us relying on God, that's a wicked thing, and it's not coming from our faith. And if it doesn't come from our faith, that means it's sin. And then the final message that we can never forget as we're seeing this roller coaster, wandering, sin-soaked journey that the people of Israel are on is Jesus is going to come through this line. All of this, everything that's happening, is the line of Jesus. Because remember, Jesus comes out of the tribe of Judah. So even though they are doing their best to spoil God's plan and defy him and displease him, God is still working his plan through the tribe of Judah and all the people of Israel for salvation, not just to the people of Judah and of Israel, but to the whole world, including those among those pagan nations who would put their faith in Christ. So that's 2 Kings chapter 16. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you're enjoying this reading. What a great opportunity to watch this unfold day by day. All right, God bless.